This is For the Rest of Us with the Reverend Canon Megan Castellan, a podcast about life, faith, theology, and the Bible, for the rest of us. Well, hello, everyone. Welcome back to For the Rest of Us with the Reverend Canon Megan Castellan. Hey, gang, it's just Adam again. You can tell I'm not the Reverend Canon Megan Castellan. I think you figured it out by now, but just in case you need to know, I'm not her. I work with Megan, though, at the Episcopal Diocese of Central New York. Was a lifelong Catholic. Now I'm an Episcopalian, and Megan's still just helping me make sense out of all of this as we kind of stumble our way through life and faith through the lens of the Episcopal Church. You can kind of consider her my Ron Burgundy.
Well, I could be wrong, but I believe diversity is an old wooden ship that was used during the Civil War era.
To my, we'll say, Brick Tamlin.
I don't know what we're yelling about!
As I'm just doing the best I can, and I don't know what we're yelling about. But anyway, Megan, what do you have for us this episode of For the Rest of Us?
So today, as we're recording this, it is right before the opening match of the World Cup, which is an event that I love, not because of the sports ball, but because of the ridiculousness that it always entails. And so this got me thinking about ecumenical relations, because not unlike how people decide their World Cup affiliations, ecumenical relations are relationships and dialogues between Christian churches and denominations that are best described as you're my friend because you were nice to me once, and then you're my friend because you were friendly to a friend of a friend, but you're not my friend because you were not friendly to me or to my friend. And it's a complex web, and it contains both the best and the most ridiculous parts of humanity rolled into one. So today I thought we could talk about ecumenism and the Episcopal Church.
I love this, and as a quick aside, two things I need to say. First of all, this is one of my favorite times of year. Some people are Winter Olympics people, some people are Summer Olympics people. I am a World Cup person. I'm a huge fan of the beautiful game. I played for many years, and very much like you just said, I root for the United States because they are my home country. However, in all other international play, and especially during the World Cup, I root for England because when I was younger, I was in England when the World Cup was happening, and I fell in love with it that way. So I was like, these are my people now. This is
Right. I pledge allegiance to this group of people now.
Exactly.
Yep. I root for the people in any given match who scream their nation's anthem the loudest, number one, and number two, who have the most athletic goal celebrations. So any CONCACAF nation.
Also, this podcast is very pro-Vuvuzela.
Yeah.
If anybody remembers those.
Pro-Vuvuzela. Anyway, I digress. Also, given our recent enthusiasm for Pope Leo's encyclicals, and the Episcopal Church at General Convention is going to vote on full communion with the United Methodist Church in the U.S. This is a relevant topic, not just because of our enthusiasm for the World Cup. So broadly speaking, ecumenism is different Christian denominations becoming friends, having a dialogue to various degrees. Very occasionally, denominations will entirely merge into one. Think about the reunions of the split American denominations after the Civil War. So like the ELCA, Evangelical Lutheran Church of America, is actually the product of a couple Lutheran denominations remerging in 1988. There's also the UMC, that's the merger of the Northern and Southern Methodist churches. The PCUSA, also remerger of Northern and Southern Presbyterian churches, a couple others. Quick reminder, the Episcopal Church never split during the Civil War, and that was not our finest moment, but here we still are. More often, though, what ecumenical dialogue looks like is denominations will get together and have a conversation about where they agree, where they disagree, and then have an agreement about how they are going to work together and under what conditions. Either in a statement to the world about some issue, or how their individual churches will work together. So we have what are called full communion agreements with the Moravians, quirky band of German-descended Protestants who came over with the early waves of immigrants. Make really good cookies, by the way. They're huge clusters of Moravians in the Winston-Salem, North Carolina area and in the middle of Pennsylvania. And they have these special cookies that they make that when we passed the full communion agreement, they distributed to everybody at General Convention. So bonus of ecumenical dialogue, you get cookies sometimes. So we have a full communion agreement with the Moravians, with the ELCA Lutherans, with the Church of Sweden, which is a funny story, with the Old Catholic Church of Utrecht, not to be confused with the Roman Catholic Church. It's the Old Catholic Church of Utrecht, the Mar Thoma Church in India, the Church of South India, and a handful, the Philippine Independent Church is another one we have a full communion agreement with. And these just mean we can exchange ministers. We recognize their churches as the same as our churches. If you're a priest ordained in the Episcopal Church, like I could hop over and work at a Mar Thoma Church in India and they would recognize my ordination, presumably. They may not want to hire me as I don't speak Hindi, and that would be a fairly big roadblock, but, if I did, it would work.
It's understandable.
Yeah, and we talk to them about things. We work with them on different issues, particularly around global poverty and injustice. When the Philippines were going through some things, the Episcopal Church helped the Philippine Independent Church out a lot. Same with the Mar Thoma Church. That's one of our ways to get aid into India is through the Mar Thoma Church. So there's full communion, and then there's also these kind of big multi-church organizations. So like the World Council of Churches, Global Congress of Churches, sort of think the United Nations. Everybody comes in, everybody gets a vote, and they make statements on things. And sometimes they organize together to do things. Send food aid to a famine, organize against a war, things like that. Our domestic version of this is National Council of Christian Churches. In the US, there are also specific organizations that work on racial justice. So one of the facets of American Christianity is that a lot of our divisions among denominations have to do with racial segregation. So we have groups like Christian Churches Together, or the Consultation of Christian Churches and Unity, to address the ongoing split between like the African Methodist Episcopal Church and the United Methodist Church and the Episcopal Church, because that split initially was born out of segregation. And so there are issues that are particular to the American context that need to be addressed, that are about race and class and these kind of historic, really thorny issues that need to be kind of addressed in a particular way. And there are groups that get together and work on those. And so there's all of this going on. All of that is a part of ecumenism. And sort of in the history of the Christian church, there wasn't really a concerted effort to do this sort of work until relatively recently. The idea was that if you were in a church, your church was the right church, and you didn't worry about anybody else, mostly because you didn't talk to them. You didn't have to. If you were in Sweden, you had one Christian church, and that was the Christian Church of Sweden. And you didn't really run into a whole bunch of other people, maybe a Catholic once or twice. But the world was fairly homogeneous in terms of other Christians you were going to bump into on account of the religious wars of the Middle Ages and state churches still being a fairly major force, other things like that. As that starts to change and industrialization happens, people move to cities and they bump into each other. And we get groups like the YMCA and the YWCA, so the Young Men's Christian Association, starts to, for the first time, reach across denominational lines in order to achieve a common goal. Now, if you don't know anything about the YMCA other than it's a really good disco song and it has a nice gym that is affordable, then it might surprise you to know that the origins of the YMCA were in England, started by a guy in London who was concerned that men were falling away from Christianity because Christianity had become too feminine. It was ever thus. So he undertook an effort to revitalize what became known as muscular Christianity. Christianity for the whole person, particularly men, to exercise their mind, body, and spirit. And gyms were a part of this, a place where young men could go and be taught about good, clean Christian living, give them an alternative place to hang out besides taverns or brothels after they got out of the factory where they worked. It could be a place for education. It could be a place for them to work out, to be good, manly men, and to pursue a life in Christ. About 10 years later, the YWCA also starts and does something similar, but for women. Clearly, the YMCA has moved a bit away from this muscular Christianity idea. But yes, believe it or not, modern ecumenical movement was in part sponsored by the YMCA. So, yes, young men. There is a place you can go.
I was going to say, there's not a chance I'm not using that as a sound clip in this episode, but I digress.
But in the process of opening camps and gyms and working side by side by people who did not go to church with them on Sundays, people discovered that you could, if you had a common goal, work peaceably with Presbyterians and Methodists and Baptists and not argue so long as you had a goal and you were serving someone else. At the same time, this is the chunk of history where industrial cities are springing up across Western Europe and the US, and a lot of church people are becoming concerned about the social conditions that they're seeing. And so they're beginning to unite in these parachurch mission organizations to address the social conditions. So the social gospel, this kind of progressive mission movement, also begins to unite people across denominational lines, and that also begins to get people thinking, maybe we can unite with people outside of our little church bubble. This leads to the 1910 World Missionary Conference in Edinburgh. And it's the early form of mission. It's less convert everyone in a modern evangelical sense and more let's fix the world. There's a lot of poverty. There's a lot of injustice. We should fix it. And the idea about how to unite across denominational lines at the time was to unite with a common goal. We're not going to talk about our theological differences. We're going to make sure all these people get Bibles. We're not going to talk about, the differences in how many ecumenical councils we think that there were in the early church. We're going to make sure that these people have something to eat. And this kind of works because everybody's on the same page when it comes to the social gospel and the ability of humanity to really kind of get in and fix all of our social problems. And then World War I and World War II come and just make everyone sad. After the two wars, ecumenism keeps developing, but it divides into two streams. So one bucket says, okay, well, the way to address the devastations caused by the wars is to articulate a common witness to our faith in Jesus and the gospel. And that gets known as the faith and order movement, that we need to sit down in a group and articulate our common belief in the gospel. And the other bucket says, okay, well, what we need to do is work together to promote peace and justice so that this never happens again. Both groups were very intent on, we can never let this happen again. But the way to go about it was different. But in both groups, the impetus was we have to unite somehow because our divisions are fomenting violence and division and war in the world. And we see this kind of in the secular world post-World War II too, with like the UN and things like that. So this is when the World Council of Churches is formed and the National Council of Churches. So sort of same idea as the UN. Get everybody in a room, give everybody a vote, have everybody talk out their feelings instead of shooting each other, and we'll be able to build a world without fighting. And we'll be able to solve all of our problems. And so that is sort of the really broad strokes of the ecumenical movement. And for us as Anglicans and Episcopalians, what sort of delights me is that from the start, Episcopalians have been all over this. We have been any ecumenical dialogue, Episcopalians are first in line. The guy who started the faith and order movement was an Episcopal bishop, Charles Henry Brent. One of the first people to do the life and work stuff, Episcopal clergy. Really active. He was an English bishop named George Bell, who also had some skeletons in his closet, unfortunately, but was a friend of Bonhoeffer and did all this stuff. Anglicans and Episcopalians love us some ecumenical dialogue. We are right there. I think it's partially because we love a party. And there's a denominational sense of FOMO if we're not in any sort of Any sort of gathering, we're like, well, we can go. Do you want us just to observe? We can observe. Do you want us just to hang out? We can do that.
Well, it's the cookies.
Yeah, there might be cookies. We don't know. And also because from the Elizabethan settlement, it has been part of the Anglican ethos that we are not a church that has a corner on the truth. Our foundational understanding of ourselves is that we are a particular manifestation of the church, which has always been broader and bigger than us. And so we are sort of baked in, ecumenically minded, because from the start, we have understood ourselves as part of a bigger whole. It was just that everyone else didn't want to talk to us about that because they all thought that they were the only game in town for the longest time. And then we got very excited when other people wanted to talk to us too. As far back as 1880, the 1880s, there were Episcopal priests talking about what it would mean to reunify with Rome, with Constantinople, to reunify with the Eastern Orthodox, and to have those conversations. So there were sort of one-off conversations going with the Roman Catholics, with the Eastern Orthodox, on and off. And in fact, sort of the cornerstone of how we approach ecumenical dialogue, and in fact, one of the formational documents of Anglicanism itself is something called the Chicago-Lambeth Quadrilateral, which is this imposing sounding thing. It's in the back of the prayer book with all the other historical documents, which I'm sure you have found if a sermon gets boring or if announcements run too long. It was written by a priest from New York City named William Reed Huntington, who was sort of like the guy who just does everything of his day. He was the rector of Grace Church, New York City in the 1870s, 1880s, and he was just all over the place. He called for a new Book of Common Prayer. He wrote a couple of collects for the new Book of Common Prayer. He thought ecumenical relations would be a great idea, and he established a framework for those. He went to Lambeth and was counseling bishops. He just did it all. In 1870, he wrote this essay about what an approach to Rome and to the Eastern Orthodox Church would look like, and how we might go about that. And he lays out these 4 elements that he considers fundamental, the kind of without which one cannot be understood to be a Christian in our understanding. And he says, if this is how we should approach having dialogues with other denominations, you need to have an understanding of the Holy Scripture as containing as everything necessary for salvation, which is our Episcopal phrase. You need to understand the Apostles' and Nicene Creed as sufficient and essential statements of faith. We need to have the 2 sacraments instituted by Jesus, at least, and the historic episcopate locally adapted. So those are our 4 cornerstones of what we understand the bedrock of the faith to be. And the Episcopal bishops adopted it, and they said, this is very smart, we like this. They took it to the Lambeth Conference that same year, and the Anglican bishops adopted it because at the time, the British Empire was expanding wildly, and they were trying to figure out, as the Anglican Church is expanding and it's going into all of these different contexts, how do we kind of keep the Anglican communion together? And what is our bedrock understanding of what the church needs to look like in all these different places? And so the Anglican bishops actually handed this out as this is the cornerstone of Anglicanism. And to this day, it's on Anglican.com or Anglican.org as one of the foundational documents of Anglicanism. It is one of the instruments of communion that binds us together. And it's also how we go into ecumenical dialogues. We say, this is who we are. This is what we have to give when we, come to some sort of communion understanding with another church. This is what it's going to be based on. And right from it, you can immediately kind of tell how an ecumenical dialogue is going to go, whether, at least from our side, whether a group is going to need to give a whole lot or whether they're going to go pretty easily with it. Our buddy Pope Leo, no problem. We have great times talking to the Roman Catholics.
Pope Leo, friend of the show.
Friend of the show, Pope Leo. The local non-denominational church down the street that has an extra statement of faith that has 40 bullet points on it that you need to sign off on. That's gonna be a little bit of a heavy lift, given point number 2. That's gonna take some more work. So, but these 4 elements are the cornerstones of what we understand the faith to be and how we engage with other churches. And oh boy, do we engage with other churches. I worked for a year as an intern, my last year of seminary, at the ecumenical office of our church-wide office in New York. And we had giant files on every dialogue we had. So every conceivable flavor of Christianity you can imagine, we would have a dialogue with them. What is colloquially known as the Rastafarian Church, we had a dialogue with them. The LDS Church, we had a dialogue with them. The Russian Orthodox Church outside of Russia, we had a dialogue with them. The Polish National Catholic Church, we had a dialogue with them. Every church you have ever heard of and churches you have never heard of, at some point, we have engaged officially with them. Sometimes it didn't go anywhere. Sometimes we just sent Christmas cards. Sometimes they would fax us all the time in Greek or Russian. It varied widely, but we were talking to everyone because we firmly believed, as a matter of policy, in having all the friends. So, and I can also say that so the year I was there was 2007, 2008. So it was during the Great Schism. If you're old enough in Episcopal Church years to remember, when Catherine Jefferson Shorey was our presiding bishop, and it was a couple years after Gene Robinson, and diocese started breaking away in 2006. So a lot of turmoil was happening. The year I was there, one of my jobs was to correct sort of our directory of ecumenical relations with what our status was with all of these different churches. Were we talking to them? Were we not talking to them? Were we exchanging ministers? Were we not exchanging ministers? Were we in full communion? Were we not? And there were a couple of churches that had decided that because of Gene Robinson's ordination as the first openly gay bishop, they would no longer speak to us. And they expressed that to us through very vehement texts or very vehement faxes at the time. And one church, I think it was the Russian Orthodox Church outside of Russia, because of the fall of the Berlin Wall, the collapse of the Soviet Union, it had been established by Russian immigrants during the Cold War, and it had been cut off from the motherland during all of that. Now, because of the fall of communism, it had reestablished ties with the Russian Orthodox Church within Russia. And so it no longer felt it could be in communion with us because it had closer ties with Russia itself. So it sent us a fax in Russian explaining that, and then in English explaining it again, which was the one we could read. And so it was tempting at times to feel like it was sort of an elaborate game of middle school social politics. Who's friends with who based on who else you're friends with. But the thing is, we spent a couple of months that year trying to figure out how to get a new ambulance to the Orthodox Church in Russia because there was some emergency and they needed it. And the way we did that was the Russian Orthodox Church outside of Russia, and our other ecumenical Orthodox contacts and other contacts within the Eastern Orthodox network. And we continued to, even when, the primates around the Anglican Communion would denounce us for various reasons and put out these press releases that were full of fire and brimstone, we would continue to work with them in times of disaster and work with them in times of crisis. And that was made easier because we had these pre-existing relationships. So what I learned from being there for that year is it's important to have conversations with everybody. And also, the reason we have conversations with everybody is because at some point or another, we are all bound together. And we need to help one another eventually. We're going to need to help one another. And you can be mad at someone and issue a press release and still help someone when they need it.
Yeah,
and that's what I found. Yeah.
And not to sound too glib about all of it, but we're all in this together. We all need each other. We all need these partnerships. And we can have these really big fundamental differences on things like doctrine or dogma or theology, and also be in relationship with one another and be human to one another. So I think that that's why we do this. And I'm happy that we are a part of a faith tradition that honors that continues to strive for that. And we get to see cool stuff like this happening in real time just the other day. Not to get too much on the Pope Leo train, but Pope Leo met in the Vatican with the Archbishop of Canterbury, the first ever woman Archbishop of Canterbury, and she did not have to obey Vatican protocol when it comes to how, because the Vatican has very strict protocol about when women, whether they are visitors or heads of state, are supposed to dress in a very specific way, and they let her wear her clerics in. And they sat down and had a conversation, and that's a big, big deal. And so this is something that we don't just like not pay attention to. This is actually really important.
Yeah, I mean, the whole year I was there, we were trying to strategize how to get Bishop Catherine in to see the Pope, and we couldn't do it because there were going to be all of these rules about, well, we can sneak her in. Well, she's got to wear plain clothes. Well, we've got to make sure the press isn't there. We can't talk about it. Like, there were all of these conditions under which she would be allowed to go, but we could never speak of it. And we weren't willing to make her do that. And to see the first female Archbishop of Canterbury walk in wearing her purple cassock and sit down across from the Pope is pretty amazing. And we've had a long-standing conversation both on the international level and on the national level with the Roman Catholic Church. And on the diocesan level, like, we've got tons of dialogue with them going on. And it's not like we've solved anything. I mean, we've put out a couple of like major statements about the nature of Mary and our agreement about kind of how salvation works. But every time the international dialogue released a statement, General Convention would approve it. Everybody would be really excited. It would go to the Vatican and the cardinals would say, well, have you submitted to the Pope? Nope. All right. Then nope. They wouldn't approve it. So we would do like 2 years worth of work. But, for all of that, relationships move forward, not just by fiat and not just by executive order. They move forward by showing up for the meetings and having the conversation and, sending food when somebody needs it and, sending statements back and forth and supporting each other when you need it. And it's brought us to the day where, Bishop Sarah can sit down with Pope Leo, and we may never see reunification, and that's okay. But, we're closer and we can speak together on things. We're speaking together on AI right now, apparently. So that's really great. And that unified witness is important.
Absolutely. And you mentioned the most important part, which is showing up and continuing the dialogue. And speaking of which, we're glad that you guys keep showing up and continuing the dialogue with us. So, hey, let's have a conversation. Hop in the comments. Let us know what you think. Are you a fan of ecumenism? Are you one of our friends who maybe is like, nah, bullpucky, I don't want to have anything to do with it? Let us know in the comments. And on your way out the door, even if you disagree with us, be nice. Leave us a review, leave us a rating, share with a friend. We can't wait to talk to you next time on For the Rest of Us. Thanks for stopping by and checking out For the Rest of Us. If you like the show, leave us a review and a rating. Make sure to subscribe and share it with a friend. We hope to see you again next time. For the Rest of Us is a production of the Episcopal Diocese of Central New York.